Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Creative Live, the world's best online classroom for creative professionals, with classes on songwriting, engineering, mixing, and mastering. The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast is also brought to you by Ernie Ball, the world's premier manufacturer of guitar strings, bass strings, and guitar accessories. And now your hosts, Joey Sturgis, Joel Wenisek, and EYAL Levy.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Good. You remember that time that we were about to podcast and I hid the last Red Bull from myself so that I would have it for the podcast and then I couldn't find it?
Was that today?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm new to this story.
I found it. But we were just talking about how you were tired, dude. You got to step into the liquid meth game.
Oh my God, man. Okay, this weekend I was staying up. I mean, I normally go to bed at 9 o'clock, and I was staying up till like 2:30 in the morning mixing, and I was drinking like 5 or 6 cups of coffee. Usually one is enough for me to be wired because I don't drink coffee. So I'm running rough. It sucks.
I'm on the espresso game, man. I got a machine. It's called a Jura, and you just put beans into it and water, and then it
does the rest.
Yeah, it does the rest. So it
comes
really
out
great.
Like Starbucks and mixes whipped cream and shit in it.
Yeah.
That's not coffee. That's cake.
Yeah, that's cake.
Yeah.
All right, well, whatever. I drink tea, so fuck you guys.
Well, does your tea have caffeine?
Yeah, but there's a way to dip the bag for 15 seconds and discard the water if you don't want the caffeine. So, you can do it both ways.
What's the point if you're not going to get the caffeine, though?
Antioxidants, taste, flavor, aroma, warm and tingling sensation on your face. I don't know.
I still don't hear what the point is besides the warm tingling sensation on my face. I don't.
EYAL's very much a consumer. He takes stuff and wants the reaction from it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few things. Like, I don't like the taste of alcohol, and I don't drink very often, but I always preferred liquor over beer, like back when I was touring. And
hey, we can't be friends anymore. I can't drink hard liquor. I'm sorry.
Well, I just figure, what's the point of getting full and tired when you're trying to get drunk? So, may as well drink some liquor.
Here's the deal.
It works.
I'll explain it to you like this. I hated beer too until I went to college, but in Wisconsin, we drink beer different than the rest of the world drinks beer. See, the rest of the world, everybody like sips it and they enjoy it over like a half an hour. Wisconsin, we're like, fuck that. We shotgun. So we get the beer and then you look over at us a minute later and it's already gone. And they're like, what happened to the beer? And you're already on your third one. So we just get it done. So we treat beer like it's liquor here, but that's just like the culture of drinking that we have.
Yeah, but I feel like having to take 8 of those bottles or cans worth, where you could just have like 4 or 5 shots and be good and not be like weighed down. I don't know. Makes it feel bloaty.
It's more of like a tradition. Like, I just grew up that way doing it, meaning like once I hit that age, and I don't know. Okay, here's the deal. My first time drinking hard liquor when I was like 16, I had like 9 double shots of brandy, and I peaked like 87 times. I came home, my old man was like, "Oh yeah, boy, you'll learn." I'm like, "Damn it, this sucks." And he's like, "Yeah, you got rotten gut," and I hung over the toilet all day, so I can't drink liquor after that. That ruined liquor for me for my entire life. So now I have to substitute, and I've turned into a wino.
Yeah,
so I
had
my wine.
a similar experience as well, man. When I was like 15 or whatever, and I got drunk off beer for the first time. It made me like really nauseous, and I remember like I was at this dude's house, and it was a party, and I was kind of laying in his bed, and someone in another room kept yelling the word cheesecake for some reason.
Cheesecake.
Yeah, I don't know why. And every time I heard them say cheesecake, it made me want to throw up.
Ugh.
And they just kept doing it over and over, and then that was enough to scar me for about 10 years. So I pretty much I wouldn't drink from 15 to like 26 or 27, I think it was, and then finally I cracked. And
that's how I feel about Robitussin and cough syrup.
Robitussin. If you're getting drunk off Robitussin, man,
that stuff used to make you trip.
That's like 12-year-old shit.
Well, it was a long time ago when I drank it.
Well, that's the scissor or whatever now, right?
Maybe, but
that's what they do. They take. I don't know if it's Robitussin, but it's some kind of cough syrup mixed with some kind of alcohol, and that's like the scissor that everybody drinks gets fucked up on.
Oh, that's like, from what I understand, that's like liquid painkillers that they mix with like Sprite.
Oh, okay.
But like Robitussin used to have this property to it that if you drank enough, it would make you trip. But I mean, you had to drink like 2 bottles of that shit.
Oh god.
Bottles of fuck.
So I mean, you would really trip though. It wasn't a joke. Like it was definitely legit as far as that goes. However, so disgusting. And so, you know, it's been years and years and years and years since I ever considered doing something like that, but I will never drink cough syrup again. I just can't. Like, it fucking grosses me out.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to be able to treat your sore throat with cough syrup, don't do drugs. So, speaking of which, somebody that I don't think does drugs, but whose records sound really amazing. How's that for a
That's a great
Transition.
great transition? Yeah.
I thought it was drug month.
It said it's guitar month, the same thing. Well, we've got Kurt Ballou with us today, who is one of my production and guitar heroes. And I say guitar because, you know, lots of dudes are into the shredder guys, but I always loved what he did just in terms of bringing intensity and noise, you know, like artful, cool noise to the table as a guitarist. And then,
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, like it was like when I first heard Converge back in the day, it was like, how is this possibly so like brutally just pissed?
Yeah. He does. It's funny too because I think, you know, once we bring him on the air here and the listeners get a chance to hear him speak, like he's definitely not an abrasive or aggressive person at all.
No, not at all.
Which is crazy, you know, is considering the kind of music that he's really into. And so I think it'll be interesting.
Also, considering his production ideals, it's funny. I met him last year at NAMM, and I was expecting to meet like a real elitist, like abrasive kind of dude, and he turned out to be like one of the nicest, most thoughtful guys I've met in music. It's interesting how that works. Maybe he gets it out in the music and then he's just chill the rest of the time.
Yeah, or there's just, you know, it is an art at the end of the day. I mean, I think some people kind of want to put punk music or even like aggressive music in a category of people who are really angry and mad and have all these emotions they need to get out, but at the end of the day, too, there's still an art form to it.
I feel like that a lot of the time, while it may be... Sorry, I heard you cut out, I guess.
We lost somebody, I think.
We're good.
We're good?
Okay, there we go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I missed whatever you said, but I'm sure it was brilliant. You still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, let's just bring Kurt on, and we'll kiss his ass to his face instead of behind his back.
Awesome. Hey, how you doing, Kurt?
Great. How are you guys?
Not bad.
Fantastic.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just actually kissing your ass a little bit before we brought you on. And,
Nice. I like it.
I guess we decided to kiss your ass to your face now.
Yeah, sweet. Oh, I talk behind your
We
back.
had to sack up a little bit first.
That's fine.
So let's start with your story a little bit and tell us how you got into this, because from what I understand, you're actually a biomedical engineer, and I don't even know what that is.
Well, I mean, I've played in actually my band Converge. We've been going since I was in high school, and I'm 41 now. So, you know, I've been playing this kind of music for a long time, and you know, the kind of music that we play, there's a bit of a market for it now, but when we started, I mean, aside from being a much worse band, there was just like really no market for our kind of music at all. So anything that we wanted to do, we had to do ourselves. So I kind of took an interest in like 4-tracking pretty early on, and you know, we put out all our own records early on and booked our own shows, and you know, did everything DIY, not out of the desire to be be DIY, but because we had to be, because there was just nobody interested in helping us. And eventually we got like a little bit of money together to go into some recording studios and start making records. But I always felt like really frustrated in the recording studio environment because it wasn't turning out the way that I wanted it to, but I also didn't have the vocabulary to articulate to the engineer the vision that I had for what things should sound like. So I eventually bought myself a little bit of recording equipment. I started with a 1/2-inch 8-track and a few mics and a small mixing console, and started just making demos, just kind of like to learn about the recording process, so that I could, just be more educated when I went into studios to record my own band stuff. And then that just sort of snowballed, and friends started asking me to record their band's demos, and then later 7-inches, and then eventually people I didn't know started calling based on what they had heard friends of mine do in my studio, which I say studio, but it was actually my parents' garage.
I started in my parents' basement. So.
Yeah, I think everybody does. And then, I'm on my 4th studio now, and I've been here for about 12 years. But yeah, it's just like a snowballing natural kind of thing. And it was like, I started doing it when I was in college, and I was studying aerospace engineering in college. And when I graduated, I ended up getting a job basically doing mechanical engineering at a biomedical company, and stuff that we worked on.
So you're an actual smart person.
That's debatable, but I worked in a... so I have a degree in aerospace engineering, which one could argue that I'm a rocket scientist, but...
Wow. Well, here's the deal. We need a private jet made for us.
No. I actually, one of my senior projects was to build like an RC plane, not like from a kit, but from scratch, like design the airfoils and all that stuff. It didn't fly so good, so you probably don't want me doing that for you. I think I'm better at making records. But anyway, so I got a job doing mechanical engineering for this biomed company, and it was the first time in my life that I had any money in my pocket. So, that stuff just all went into my studio that I was moonlighting at. And then eventually I was laid off from that company and got a really nice severance package. And that was like the kick in the ass I needed to start doing music full time. But yeah, I never set out to do this stuff full time. It was just a love of mine that, fortunately snowballed into a career. And I wish I had some formal training. I had never interned with anybody or assisted anybody else, and so I think I learned pretty slowly, and that's a blessing and a curse, because I think I developed my own style because of it, but I also learned slowly.
You have an interesting approach to how you work or how you decide to work with bands. Is that right? Like, from what I understand, you believe if the artist isn't going to play it properly, you shouldn't be recording it.
Yes and no. I'm sort of malleable. I believe that there's a lot of different aesthetics and ethics involved in music, and at the end of the day, I want to go to work and be excited about what I'm doing and have fun doing what I do all day, as I'm sure everybody does, and that means different things for different people. I'm not really philosophically opposed to any production technique, but for me, I enjoy making what I consider real music, real players, real instruments, things. I like recording live if possible. Unfortunately, my studio is not really set up for a lot of live tracking. I've done albums where I followed the band on tour, sat on stage next to them while they played, and then their live performances became the album. Things like that are really fun for me and exciting. There's sort of the immediacy of that type of thing.
You can only pull that off if the band is good, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You can't just do that with anybody.
For sure. Well, let me just take a step. I'll address that in a second. Let me just take one step back and just say, I think I'm like a few years older than you guys. So I come from like the last generation of people who were raised recording on tape. So for me, like a lot of like the modern things that are done in order to, make pristine records just weren't possible back then. So I was raised with a certain kind of aesthetic that didn't used to be a choice, but now is a choice. So that's part of my difference. And also I was I got my start recording on 4 tracks. So, when you only have 4 tracks, you really have to commit to things. You have to record things simultaneously. You have to either mic the drums with one mic, or you have to mic the drums with a bunch of mics and then mix them together down to 1 or 2 tracks. You're not going to like multi-mic a guitar amp on a 4-track and then keep the various mics on separate tracks so you can make decisions later. So like my whole like education in recording was about making decisions in the moment and then sticking with those decisions, sort of like life. You come to a crossroads in life, like, where am I going to have dinner? And then you decide you're going to go to this place, and then you meet a girl there and you end up getting married, but if you could, whatever, like, you could have just have easily decided to go eat dinner someplace else, and then you could have met somebody else and then ended up dead, or who knows.
Well, one of the things we always preach is right now, we have so many tools available which give us so many options to do different things to our music and our audio. And one of the things that I got into was, analysis paralysis. Is too many things to be working on and too many things to be tweaking. And so one thing that really sped up my workflow was to start committing, just make something sound cool and then print it to an audio file and delete the original and then just move on.
Yeah, I agree, because like sometimes it's hard to decide what your guitar overdub sound is going to be if you haven't decided on your guitar rhythm sound, and it's tough to determine what your bass sound is going to be if you haven't determined the tempo of the song yet, or so forth and so on. Like, each decision is based on what came before it, and if you leave yourself infinite variables at the end, you'll never make a decision about anything.
Absolutely.
So do you find that in a way your records are close to mixed before you're done, or do they kind of mix themselves as you go along?
I'm pretty heavy-handed in mixing, but yeah, I mean, the vibe is there. There hasn't been too many times where other people have mixed my recordings, so it's tough for me to say like what somebody else's take on mixing my recording would be. But yeah, I mean, I think that the vibe is pretty much there before mixing.
Let me ask you this, because I think the idea of mixing now for our generation is kind of a new idea. I can remember when it was a little bit foreign to reamp in the mixing process, and now it's almost assumed. It's almost like, oh yeah, we'll give you the DIs and the
well, all the way to tuning vocals and editing drums, right, and consolidating edits and things like that. Now people think it's all mixing, doing post-production, making stems.
When I mix a record that I didn't record, I very much discourage that kind of stuff, and for several reasons. Number one, I feel as though remote mixing is more of a technical craft than a creative craft, sort of like mastering. Like when you send your record off to be mastered and the mastering engineer like drastically changes it, it's typically off-putting to the band and the engineer, the mix engineer. It's more just like, optimize this. So, and I feel like that's because the mastering engineer, and in this case, the mix engineer, just hasn't spent nearly as much time with the songs as the tracking engineer, producer, band, etc. So they don't necessarily have quite the same vision of the artistic intent of the song without having been through that whole process. Personally, I'm just kind of not into reamps in general, just because I feel like as a guitar player, there's a big interaction that happens between me and the sound that I hear coming back from the speakers as I'm recording. Right. So I don't like to, I certainly, track DIs once in a while and do reamp things from time to time, but but I think of that as more of a safety type of thing and not as something I would do, as a matter of course. I want the players to interact with their tone as they're performing, just so they can get the ultimate performance.
And that's how it was designed, I think, originally. It was designed to be sort of like a safety measure or a backup plan. Yeah. Whereas now it kind of became just status quo, like, record the DI.
If you're doing it with Sims, and then like the mix tone is just like a slight tweak on the Sim that you were tracking with, like, I mean, I'm into that. But what I don't like is when people ask me to mix their record, and they're not just asking me to mix it, but they're asking me to build the entire production. I feel like that's a little bit out of the range that I would want to do as a mix engineer.
I wish we could live in your world, Kurt, because it's so opposite.
No, you can. I mean, I try to pick and choose projects that I think will be enjoyable to work on, and for me, like, that would make me feel paralyzed, trying to, determine for a band without them present what is their sound. I guess that's what I'm always trying to get at with the band, whether I'm recording them or mixing them, is not so much like getting them to conform to my idea of what good sound is, but for me to find what it is about them that makes them unique, and then help them capture it. And to not be present for the guitar sound. As a guitar player, I would have a tough time with that personally.
Right.
A technical question about reamping? Well, not that technical, but do you feel like there's always something lost in the tone? Yeah, like, because, I've been playing guitar forever as well, and I always have felt like there's like this, I don't know, like a little bit of signal loss or something that
it's subtle, but it's definitely.
Have you guys ever just tried playing guitar out of different length cables?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's been a couple times I've plugged into guitar amps just to test them with a 1 or 2 foot cable, and I'm like, whoa, this sounds awesome. There's a difference just in that. But there's okay. So you guys all play guitar, right?
Yes.
Well, I do. Joey, do you play guitar?
Yeah, I do.
I've seen pictures of you playing guitar. That is
absolutely.
doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
Yeah, this is something that EYAL probably just doesn't know about me, but yeah, I do.
Well, okay. I knew that you play guitar in the studio and stuff.
I've seen him do it in person.
But I didn't know if you consider yourself a guitarist or not.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad actually plays guitar and has basically for his whole life. And he teaches guitar as well, and so I kind of learned.
Learn things every day. Yeah. I thought that you were just one of those dudes who is just good at music, so you could pick up the guitar and play some if you wanted to. But I didn't realize that you're like a guitarist. That's cool.
Yeah.
You guys are lucky to come from musical families. There was very little music in my family when I was a kid. I wish that I had more music around when I was a kid.
It's one of the biggest advantages I've had in my life is, in my opinion, coming from a musical family. Absolutely.
Anyway, the reason why I asked you guys if you're guitar players is I wanted to ask if you feel like you can judge a guitar tone better when you're playing it or when you're listening to somebody else play it.
For me, I like to take the more objective approach, which is to do it after the fact, because I do always feel like if you're sitting down you don't have to be sitting down. If you're playing the instrument and you're in the moment, everything feels like it's right. Everything feels like it's going good. And then you listen back to it and you're like, oh, that wasn't so good. I kind of messed up this part and I didn't.
I don't necessarily mean about performance. I mean about a tone.
Well, even the tone, I can imagine. The other thing that you hear, depending on how loud you're listening to the tone, is the sound of the pick, hitting the strings, and that actually adds to the transient of the tone. And then when you hear the tone back, that's not there anymore because that was happening in the room and not through the guitar cable, and just various things. So I think there's definitely two feelings. You have the one feeling, which is what it sounds like while you're playing, and the other feeling, which is what it sounds like when it's played back. And I like to judge from the one that's being played back because ultimately that's what other people are going to hear.
I feel the exact same way. I've noticed that there's been lots of times that I fake myself out because I got into the sound in the room while I was playing. And like he said, the pick attack, especially when tracking bass, I've faked myself out the most because the pick attack is so loud that I think that that's part of the tone and it's cutting and awesome. And then I hear it back and it's not nearly as cool as I thought. So that's definitely happened to me quite a bit. Are you the opposite?
I mean, I think it's important to have both, but I feel as though I can track down a problem faster when I'm playing. Like something where, like, you know, sometimes you're getting a guitar tone with somebody, they're playing guitar, and you can tell they're not totally feeling it. Like sometimes for me, I can just grab the guitar and play for a second and be like, oh yeah, obviously it's because there's like not enough mids, or there's like something screwy and there's some latency, or, you know, something you wouldn't notice as an engineer, that all of a sudden as soon as you're playing the guitar, you're like, oh, okay, there's not enough gain, or like there's too much like woof coming off this guitar, we need to throw an EQ pedal in the chain just to tighten it up, or something like that. I feel like I can sort through the problems a lot more quickly when I play it.
Yeah, from that perspective, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's sort of going back to your earlier question about, can I hear a difference with reamps? And usually my very first step when a band says like, hey, here's our DIs, and make some reamps for us, like I'll go out into my live room and I'll get a guitar, and I'll try to pick kind of like like a middle of the road guitar, and then like line up a bunch of amps and maybe track 3 or 4 different amps simultaneously, so I have some options, and I'll get them sounding good playing them in the room, and then I run the DI into them, and then I'm like, oh, this doesn't sound good, and then sometimes it's just because it didn't sound good to begin with and I couldn't tell because I was playing it, but also a lot of times it's because there's something lost in that sound. I mean, maybe it's just all the cabling, maybe it's the additional circuitry, maybe they used a terrible DI, maybe it wasn't a very good sounding guitar to begin with. But yeah, it never sounds the same to me. Although it is nice, especially with bass, to have the option to like put like a multi-band compressor on it or something like that before it gets to the amp.
So you actually use bass amps. That's a real
so weird that like just recording real instruments is weird for you guys.
Well, no, that's not
weird for us. It's weird for the common, like the state of the game has just been changed for our generation.
I think I have something to say about that. That's kind of interesting. Like, so there's a lot of people that are like my age that sort of grew up recording on tape that are, you know, really like sort of raise their noses to the idea of tracking with amp sims and drum replacement and drum programming and all that kind of stuff. But like, there was a parallel that happened a few years ago. Like, I'm sure you guys probably read tape op, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back
years.
in the early days of tape hop, you know, it's primarily been like an indie focused, or, you know, all underground music focused magazine, and the people that read it and created the magazine, you could tell were very diehard analog. You know, they loved Steve Albini and all like the, you know, also all the classic 70s recording engineers, the Glyn Johns and stuff like that. And they worshipped all that kind of stuff. But then there's also there's an indie aesthetic for analog, but there's also an indie ethic for DIY. And then, so at a certain point, they started to like really embrace and then later prefer digital recording because of how DIY it enabled you to be and how mobile it enabled you to be. And I think that the same thing is happening now that virtual instruments have gotten so much better. And I can really get behind that because the whole reason I started recording in the very beginning was to be more DIY. It was like the more you can kind of take control of the creation of your own music, the more invested in it you'll be. And like, you know, how can you possibly be more invested than by having a setup that's portable or, you know, sort of self-contained, that you can do everything yourself. You're not dependent on, you know, a recording studio or, you know, booking time with, you know, somebody else or anything like that. You can do everything yourself now because all those tools are contained within an environment that you can control, and that's like the ultimate in DIY. So from that perspective, I'm like super in favor of all this virtual instrument stuff, but I still totally hate using them. for me, but I'm totally I have great admiration for people that are able to use those tools really well, and I think it is the future, and I'm learning more and more about that stuff all the time.
Well, I would always rather prefer to record a real instrument. I just found myself recording in a genre where the playing has to be so technically on that almost nobody can actually do it.
I think that sort of genre is also extremely competitive, whereas like in indie worlds or hardcore or noise rock, whatever the kind of shit that I usually do, like people I think are a little bit more concerned about their records being unique, and I think that in the sort of slicker metal world, they seem to be very competitive with each other. With like,
you're correct.
My record's the loudest. My drummer can like do double bass at 320 BPM, or my drummer can do it at 325, or whatever. It's like.
I wish more bands wanted an original sound, because I mix a lot of records, Kurt, and I'll tell you that like it's my primary focus. And so many times bands come back and they'll reference the same 4 or 5 records that I had mixed and be like, we want it to sound just like this. And you're like, why? You guys are a different band. And they're like, well, dude, that's the sound. That's what we want. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a problem doing it. It's money and I'm having fun. But at the same time, part of me always really wants to sit down and just like make that sound with that band and do something unique and fresh.
Have you guys ever tried to actually like duplicate the sound of a record that you've done?
Yeah, it never works.
It's so bad.
Yeah, it never ever really worked. At least for me, it's never worked out.
No.
What do you think, Joey? I think.
Well, I got to go to NRG once when Jay Baumgartner was working with a band, and I love to tell this story. It's really cool. So I was in room A doing vocals or something, and then he was in room C or B, I think, and he was recording a full band, but I didn't know this. So we were on break. We were like on a food break, and I'm just walking around the studio because there's tons of awesome stuff in there, just looking around. And I hear some music coming out of this room, and so I kind of just wandered over there to see what was going on, and there was basically about 3 or 4 people in a control room who were all sitting in different chairs, just kind of looking at the ground and listening to the music, and it sounded great. And I walk in there and I listen to the song, and I wait till the song the song is going along, and all of a sudden I hear sort of a mistake, and I was like, oh, I wonder if anyone knows that mistake is in there. And then all of a sudden the music kind of starts to crumble and just stops, and I look over and I look through the glass, and there was a band in there playing. And I thought that everyone was listening to a CD. Like, I had no clue that there was a full live band playing this song, like in the live room, because the way the windows were, it was kind of dark, you couldn't see.
Yeah.
But as soon as I looked over there, I was like, oh, wow. And that experience for me, I'll never forget that, because I had never heard something like that in real life.
So the monitor mix was just that good?
Yeah, the monitor mix was like, literally you could put that on a CD and ship it. It sounded great, at least in that room. I mean, I don't know what they got going on over there, but it was awesome. And I think there's a lot of people that are getting into this that don't know that. They don't know about that.
It's really a joy when you're in a studio and you have players who can just kill it, and you get to, because you have such a great perspective on all of the tones of every individual instrument when you hear it all in context with each other.
It's almost like you can actually do your job when they when they can actually play and sound great on your instruments.
Yeah.
It's like your mind is free to actually produce and engineer.
Yeah.
What a concept. Eh?
Granted, you can't be as like meticulous about any of the performances or about the tone, but you almost don't care, because you're so excited to be hearing the performance that you're not really focused on the sounds. I actually earlier this year I was recording High on Fire, and they're the kind of band that aren't quite done writing songs when they enter a studio, so there's always a bit of pre-production, and I had them, all set up, tracking live, and I was really pushing for them to track this record live, because it was sounding great, just the 3 of them playing together in the live room. And like, my studio doesn't really have much in the way of ISO booths, so it was just like, I had a couple gobos set up, but the amps were like 6 feet from the drums, and everything's just blasted in the live room, and it sounded awesome.
That's the kind of band you would expect that on. The kinds of bands, and I don't work on the same kind of stuff that Joey and Joel work on, but I feel like the kind of bands the thing that's in common between what we all do, me, Joey, and Joel, is that those bands playing live in the studio probably wouldn't work out, but I've toured with High on Fire, and I can totally see how that would make sense.
Yeah, it's almost hard to get that band to track one person at a time, although they're accustomed to doing it now. But like, yeah, Matt hates headphones. He just wants to like have an amp blaring in his face, and that makes him happy.
Yeah, if you're recording High on Fire, the thing is to capture whatever brings the best out of him, because there really is only one Matt out there.
Yeah, it's like I almost like don't want to double track his guitars, because like he literally cannot touch the guitar without doing at least like a quarter tone vibrato on every single note he hits, including chords. So just like doubling rhythm tracks is like sounds like super chorused and wobbly. So you almost like don't even want to double track them. There's a lot of times on the record where there's like leads or we just have no rhythm guitars under it, and they're either doubled leads or they're like pseudo doubled leads. Yeah.
Technical question. How would you get around doubling him and still get a huge sound that's modern? I guess, I mean, relatively modern sounding.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely not super modern sounding records, but I mean, there's all kinds of tricks, room mics panned, sometimes like, you delay and slightly detune the sound and pan one to the other side. Sometimes it's just like mono guitar. I try to do different tricks. Sometimes he doubles himself, and it'll be like the Iommi thing where it's like it's kind of doubled but kind of not. Where like he hits the important things, but then there's some like in between things that diverge, and that just sort of adds to the kind of like swirliness of a doubled lead.
Gotcha. Well, there's an interesting like thing that happens. Like for example, Jack White. I think the fans of that music kind of expect it to sound a certain way. With the fact that it's just two people and just one guitar and like drums, and of course they kind of get kind of fancy on their productions from time to time. But like there is an expectation of what it should be, and it's interesting to be working in the genre we work in, because I almost wonder, where did that expectation of perfection come from? Why is it that this song isn't going to sound very good unless we...
I have a theory. My theory is that when Andy Sneap got the first Killswitch Engage record to mix, it was so messed up tracking-wise, and I do believe that Adam D is really good now, but I think that probably back then he was very young. Andy Sneap got this record. He had to totally fix up, and it got mega popular and started metalcore, basically, like as we know it. Even though melodic Swedish death metal existed for a long time, as we know it, Killswitch, in my opinion, kind of brought metalcore to the front. And I think what Andy had to do to kind of recover the record just became the sound. And I feel like from that record on to this day, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, because I could tell you my approach towards, if I was asked to produce a Converge record, I absolutely would not do it the way that I do records on the Norm. I would do it in the way that the listener sort of expects, trying not to make it too stale, but to keep it within the realm of what the listener or the fan expects the band to sound like. You don't want to come in and just...
When you guys are mixing records, do you feel like you are mixing them for the band's tastes, for the label's tastes, for their fans' tastes, for your own taste?
Depends on the format, I would say. If I'm mixing for radio, it's for the program director and the manager and the A&R guy. If it's like a local band, it's for the band. Or if it's a local band that's trying to get signed, it's for the standard. It just depends on the context. But unfortunately, It's never usually just selfishly for the band. I mean, I just went through that with a band. We made a record the band loves, and the label wanted them to be a different genre, but didn't communicate that until after the thing, and turned on the record, and the band is just like, you're dumb. This is not what we want to be or play. This is not what we want to sound like. And the label's like, too bad. We have your money. Ha.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times I'm hired because like a band wants, hey, you do that Kurt Ballou thing really good, so do the Kurt Ballou thing on our record. Or like, Like if
Do you find yourself struggling to even know what that is, or are you in touch with it to the point where you're like, oh, okay, I get what you're going for?
Yeah, generally speaking, I mean, I try to pick projects that I think that I will do well on. And if I don't think that I'll do well on a project, then I'll try to steer someone elsewhere.
Because I do get people coming in saying, can we get the Joey Sturgis thing? And for the most part, I kind of get what they mean. But then, like, we'll get halfway into the record and we'll be sending songs around, and then it's like, well, this isn't really what we wanted. And I'm like, well, this is my interpretation of your idea of what I do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess weird. What I want is like to try to help a band identify what they are. And even if they're not able to articulate it, I think that I still try to treat everyone like they have valid opinions and that their voice should be heard and that they know what they want, even if they're not able to articulate it. And I try to help them. It's obviously it's impossible to not put your own imprint on it. It's still filtering through your ears. I mean, I've, made records with bands of lots of different genres and subgenres, and there may be some common sonic threads in them just because it's filtering through my ears. But I really do try to be malleable to the project.
So let me ask you something on the topic of being malleable and RE guitar tone, which is, say you get a band and they have their own preconceived notion of what the tone should be, and you don't think that their preconceived notion matches the reality of what they're actually looking for. Do you have any go-to pieces of guitar gear that you'll impose, or will you try to hear them out first? How do you approach that?
Like anything I do in my studio, I'm always like, I try to keep the band's budget in mind, so I will scale how much I intervene based on how much time they have. I do records in 2 days sometimes, and I do records in a month sometimes. So, based on how long they're there, I'll interject more or less. But I always do try to. So,
do you interject less if they have more time, or the other way around? Because
I get what you're saying.
If you have more time, you could experiment with their gear more. Versus if you have less time, you can go with your go-to. But I can see how you could see it the complete opposite way, which is if you have less time and they come in, you want to get what they've got and you be done because you don't have time to go into it further.
Yeah. I think in the sort of the more time scenario, if I'm not feeling what they're doing but they are feeling it, I'll try to like do both, whether that's like tracking multiple amps simultaneously, like one that they like and one that I like, or whether that's like, track everything with one rig and then track it all again with another rig or something like that. Sometimes I will do that in situations with more time, like the band Beast Milk that I recorded a couple of years ago. They were feeling a certain guitar sound when we were tracking, and then but I had some other ideas, and in the end I think like the rhythm guitars are maybe comprised of like 6 or 7 different amps, and we're kind of like toggling between them based on the riff. So yeah, with more time, I will do that. But yeah, I think it's just kind of like trying to establish what a band is into, and it's also trying to be aware, try to be self-aware that I don't get what they're trying to do. And sometimes that means that what they're trying to do sucks. Other times it means that I just don't get it. Like,
right.
There's been bands where I've recorded where like it took me a little while to recalibrate my ears to understand what they were doing. Okay, a band like Torch, they're like, people call them stoner pop, right? Because it's sort of like the aesthetic is kind of the stoner doom aesthetic a little bit. I mean, they're their own thing, but there's a little bit of that sort of stoner doom aesthetic, but everything's in major keys. So it's like weird because, you'd expect everything to be in minor keys, but they just, flip it over and make it all major and happy, even though it's these like punishing, fuzzy, doomy guitar tones. So it's like
I gotta hear this.
oh yeah. If you haven't heard Torch, they're awesome. I've worked on their last few records. I recorded and mixed Neanderthal, and then Jonathan, the bass player, who's a really good recordist, he had done their previous record as well as the EP that followed that, and then the last 2 albums he tracked and I mixed, and they're a great band. But yeah, it's all just like major keys. Or actually, one of my most recent projects, 4 Years Strong, their stuff is mostly major keys too, and it's like, but that's kind of the only thing that's different about them for me versus the kind of stuff that I'm more known for. So it just requires a little bit of like ear calibration. I think guitar sounds are no exception to that. Sometimes like you're just not feeling a guitar sound because you haven't figured out how it fits in context yet. Other times you're not feeling a guitar sound because it sucks, and there's just like a stubborn, opinionated guitar player who, needs to be put in their place. So, in situations like that, sometimes I'll indulge them, or sometimes like I'll start polling other people in the room, like, their bandmates, try to figure out who like their bandmate is that they respect, and see how that person feels about the tone. And I mean, I try to make it so it's not like Kurt, the dictator, telling you that your sound sucks, that you have to change. I try to like sort of generate consensus amongst everybody in the room. Is this, or what is it about this that we like? Is there anything about it we don't like? And maybe I could suggest some other options that'll work. So in like the average project for me, which is usually like 10 days to 2 weeks, there's usually enough time for me to educate myself about the band, listen to their previous recorded output, and kind of talk to them a little bit about it, about what they liked about it and then what they didn't like about it, and then listen to the rig that they're used to playing out of, and then also then being able to say like, yeah, I'm not sure about this, or I like it, but let's try a few other options. And then I've got, probably 30 guitar amps in my studio, so I'll pull out a whole, maybe 5 or 6 that I think might be likely replacements or supplements for the live tone, and as well as different cabinets and pedals and stuff. And then we'll kind of, mess around for 3 or 4 hours and just see if there's anything I have in the studio that gets them closer to where they think they want to be. What I really don't like is when people come in thinking that because they like some records that I've made and that I've been making records longer than they have, that I know better than them. Like, I mean, I feel like everybody's opinion is valid, regardless of their ability to articulate it. Unfortunately, like the people that can articulate opinions the best usually get their way, and they might not actually be the best person to be deciding the direction for things.
They're just really good at articulating.
Yeah. So I really do try to listen to everybody and try to pull opinions out of people who aren't voicing them.
That's great. Yeah. That's like a really good point to kind of accent for upcoming people who want to be better at producing and be a better producer is the psychology behind it. Sometimes there are people who know exactly what's right for the song, but they're shy, or they don't speak up, or they can't articulate their ideas, and so you do have to kind of go in and pull that out of them. So that's a good point.
Yeah, lots of the most talented people on earth aren't known for their social skills or communication skills.
Very true.
So that sounds to me like very, very sound advice.
Yeah, for
Definitely.
sure.
It's like the guy you got to catch on the bathroom break and like, so what do you think? And then they'll tell you when the band isn't around. Then you got to go and bat for them when you get down with the band.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely some bands too where I've had to just be a shoulder to cry on for each individual member, independent of each other, in order to, but building trust with the band that you're working with is very important. And if you have to be their bartender for a little while, then that's what you got to do in order to make them, because if they trust you, they're more likely to articulate what they want, and they're also more likely to be excited about the record, and then they'll perform better, and just everything will be not only a better product but a more enjoyable experience.
I feel like trust is one of the biggest obstacles that upcoming producers have to overcome with their clients. I hear from people all the time who tell me that they get clients, but their clients don't want to try their ideas. They don't want to check out their gear choices. They don't want to do anything that the engineer says. And my opinion is it's because they don't trust you yet, because you A, don't have the body of work, but B, you may not have taken the steps to win the band over.
That's true. And another thing that I think works against people in those situations often is that the band has spent, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, writing these songs, and then the producer gets to come in at the 11th hour with the benefit of never having heard them before, and hear them with objectivity and without having put 2 years worth of time and effort into those songs. And they can just, immediately tear them down and say, the verse is way too long in that, or you don't need 3 bridges in that song, or whatever. And the band are just going to be kind of butthurt because, they've been slaving away on these songs for 2 years, and they've developed a lot of ownership over these songs. And then also, in a lot of cases, the types of bands I record, the singer is not particularly involved in arranging the songs, so they write all of their lyrics based on whatever arrangement the band has come up with. So if the producer comes in, in the midst of like the 10-day or 14-day session and says, hey, your song doesn't need 3 bridges, and the singer's just going to go, but what about all the lyrics I wrote? Now the song doesn't make any sense. So you kind of can't make changes. So I think that if you can find a producer and get them involved with your songwriting early on, so that you don't develop too much ownership over what you've written before it feels really set in stone, then you'll be better able to optimize the songs before entering the studio. If you can, find a producer who's willing to work with you in the songwriting phase long before you're in the studio phase. I
try to do that with bands when they are into it for the exact same reasons that you just said, all those reasons, and especially the vocals. I want a vocalist to come in as prepared as they're comfortable to be, but at the same time, I don't like what happens when you change everything on them and they are unhappy. I don't like the vibe. You got to keep vocalists happy. So
how can they even get behind their own song?
Yeah, exactly.
But riffs are compartmentalized. Like you do riff A for 4 reps, and then riff B for 4 reps or whatever. But vocals, that should be a cohesive narrative that goes throughout the entire song. And if you rearrange the song, then now all of a sudden, like if the verse is now the chorus and whatever, like, now the song doesn't read properly, so the singer needs to completely redo, the entire song. So you really want to have a pretty good arrangement before, before you set the singer loose writing lyrics.
Absolutely.
Joey, do you get in early on songwriting stuff?
It depends. I'm never. It seems like no project is ever the same thing twice. But there are some bands that have definitely said like, hey, we wrote these songs. We have like 12 or 15 songs that we wrote, but we really want to just come in and like kind of either write new songs with you or take these songs and get your spin on them. And in those scenarios, I'm like, if that's what I'm being hired to do, then absolutely I'm going to come in and do that. So I actually love to do that more than anything else. Like I would rather be the person who is just creative and coming up with cool ideas and cool parts and helping arrange the song and structure everything rather than making guitars quantized or, recording vocal takes or like any of that stuff. I prefer to just be more creative.
That makes sense. So, Kurt, do you mind if we ask you some questions about guitar from the audience? Because we have quite a few questions submitted. So, and, this is all through your filter. However you use this stuff is what we want to hear, because we have a few different people coming on to talk about guitars this month, and we kind of just want to get everyone's unique take. So, like, if there's a technique that you just don't use at all, then feel free to just say you don't use it. or whatever. But so Kevin George is asking, with surgical EQ, what's its usage or abuse, and what are some of the finer points of using it on guitars with you?
Well, for me, I know you guys have talked about in previous podcasts about low passing guitars and things like that. I don't typically do that, but I will often, especially on an amp that is recorded with the master not cranked. I'll find that a lot of guitar tones are a bit too sizzly for my taste. So I'll go in with like a notch filter and kind of scroll around somewhere in the 10K to 11K range and find like the real kind of stuff and get rid of that. And that's like the main, unless there's like a problem I'm hearing somewhere, that's like the main surgical thing that I'll do. I do like, I generally use like 2 or 3 EQs on a guitar for different things, and I'm mixing out of the box for most things, but in the box I'll usually have like the FabFilter Pro Q2 on guitar, and there's like the sort of built-in spectrograph on that thing, which is nice because you can see if there's like certain frequencies that are really pokey or there's some holes somewhere. So sometimes like I'll try to do a couple little boosts and cuts on that thing to level things out if I'm hearing something weird. But yeah, generally it's just like the 10 or 11K notch filter.
So I'm going to paraphrase a question because I know that this was asked later, but we've got about 30 questions that we're not going to be able to get to. So I'll just go. Ask. So if you are removing nasty, painful, high-end frequencies, how do you counter so that the tone doesn't become dull? So basically, how do you keep the guitars out in front and bright and present and awesome, yet still notch things out without killing the tone?
Just make them louder. No, I guess that's why I probably use like notch filters instead of low pass filters when it comes to like removing annoying sizzly stuff or like harsh upper mid range, because I feel like leaving in some of that ultrasonic stuff adds a sense of 3-dimensionality to it. And I also will room mic guitars for a lot of things, like a stereo room mic on guitars. So there's a bit of just sort of natural air about the guitar that makes it feel real. And then, it just really kind of depends too on what's going on with everything else in the mix. I'll obviously I listen, but like I'll look at like where am I boosting and cutting drums, where am I boosting and cutting bass, and then I'll try to do whatever boosting and cutting on guitar that I'm doing in different places than I do with the bass and the drums. And I try not to have things build up in too many different frequencies, so I'll use like different mics and different mic pre's and all that stuff for different instruments, so that there's not that kind of like natural buildup that happens when you use the same gear on everything.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Matthew Burrell was asking how you like to EQ the guitars to make room for vocals, but I feel like you just kind of answered that starts at the source of making the right gear choices so that you already start to avoid some of the overlapping frequencies. But is there more to it than that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always different. It depends on the singer's voice, but and the guitar player's sound and what kind of presence they have in the mix, of course. But yeah, I don't have like a default go-to, like always use this type of EQ or this mic or this whatever. But when I'm thinking about carving out space for things, I'm not just thinking about them in terms of like frequencies, but I'm thinking about them in terms of panning space. So one of the main things to get vocals and guitars away from each other is panning. And even if there's like a guitar overdub that's happening at the same time as a vocal, maybe I'll pan out the overdub 50% or something like that, just to like get it away from the vocal, or maybe the vocal's panned away from it, or always thinking there's sort of this frequency space, there's panning space, and then there's also sort of like effect space, like how deep are the reverbs that you're using in order to like place things within your stereo field. And I think that the low mid content of each instrument has a lot to do with sort of how in front or behind the speakers it feels. So I'll use all those techniques to kind of find not only how they interact, well, not just carve out space for each element of the mix, but also like carve out where I want to place them in the sound field.
And here's another question that I remember, but I'm going to have to paraphrase. Speaking of the low mids, do you have any techniques that you use to bring them out on the guitars without going too flubby or muddy?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different saturation plugins out there that can do that kind of stuff. I mean, sometimes it is just EQ. Sometimes it's compression. I when I'm getting a guitar sound out in the room, I spend a lot of time on the master volume knob and trying to dial in the right position for the master, where and how it interacts with the cabinet, so that there's the right balance of clarity and body and sizzle reduction based. So like I generally record guitars pretty loud, but not fully cranked.
So you kind of already have it kind of sounding right coming in. Or hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I do my best. I try to. I do have a tendency to make stuff a little bit too dark and honky on the way in, and so I find myself like cutting low mids and brightening them when I mix a lot of the time. But I guess I'd rather have a little bit more of that stuff there than to have to try to create it out of nothing.
Here's a question touching on getting stuff right from the beginning, which is, do you have any sort of guitar checklist or mental checklist, or just anything that you make sure that you're going to do to the guitars or to the amps or whatever before you start recording? Like, do you have set rules?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, this is sort of scaled based on how long the band is in the studio, because, I mean, there's times where I very much employ a fuck it attitude. But what I like to do, as I mentioned earlier, is spend time with the guitarist and listening to their previous output and their current rig and stuff, and see how that sounds, and then make suggestions and maybe swap out some pedals or a cabinet or a head or a guitar or whatever, just to try to kind of dial in what's the right sound for the songs. But then once that's kind of determined as to what gear we're going to be using, then there's a bit of optimization that needs to happen. Like, I got to make sure all the cables are good, make sure there's not any like noisy power supplies. Sometimes we'll just run on just batteries instead of power supplies for the pedals. I'll almost always kind of pick up the guitar the person's gonna play and make sure that the guitar is feeling good and set up well and has the appropriate gauge strings on it and so forth and so on. Like everybody always like takes their guitar into the shop to be set up before they come record with me, and probably 75% of the people who do guitar setups don't really do guitar setups.
Yeah.
They just kind of polish them and change the strings. So I think it's pretty important to like learn about learn how to intonate a guitar, learn how to identify worn frets, learn how to identify a nut that's too high or too low, and try to find for yourself a good local guitar tech whose work you trust, or learn how to do that stuff for yourself so that you can make sure that the guitar that you're going to be recording with is capable of being played in tune. Like I did this record. I mean, I'm sure you guys know how, like, especially with drop tune stuff, sometimes you have to like intentionally detune the low strings in order to get it to sound in tune, just because like the wobble and all that. So I was recording this band recently, and the bass was like, we had the open, I think it was a C, I think it was tuned to C. We had the open C sounding great. We had the 12th fret C, sounding totally fine, but everything like in the middle of the neck was sounding terrible, especially like from like the 1st to the 5th fret. Like we just couldn't get any of those notes to sound right. And come to find out, this guy just had a super tall nut on his bass, so like there was just a lot of deflection on the string just going from open to first fret. Like ideally the nut shouldn't really be much taller than the difference. The difference between open and first fret really shouldn't be much difference than the difference between like fretting the first fret and then hammering on to the second fret. For ideal intonation. So being able to identify those kind of problems on guitar and either fix them yourself or get a guitar tech to fix them is good. I did a record recently where I had to change everybody's pickups before we even started tracking. I've had to level frets. Intonation, truss rod adjustments are very common. Replacing jacks is very common.
I just want to add that this is the kind of stuff that if you just take it to Guitar Center, drop it off and pick it up, the guy probably will not know that this is a problem. I try to work with the same guy every time, and he comes to the studio, and then after he sets up the guitars, we'll play through it with him right there and make sure that all the frets are working, everything is good to go. And I have noticed that about 70% of the time when they come back from a shop, they're not done right or not done all the way.
That High on Fire record that I just did, it just came out. There were days where the guitar tech, his name's Gabe Vianney, he's really good, he came to the studio like sometimes 4 times a day.
Yeah.
There was so much stuff for him to do. Like Matt just like caves in. He plays Les Pauls and he's got tunematic bridges and just caves in the bridges constantly.
Wow.
So like the center strings will just be buzzing like crazy because the bridge doesn't have. It's like arced in the wrong direction, like opposite the direction that the fretboard's arced.
Yeah.
Wow.
That doesn't surprise me at all because with my guy, I've had him come to the studio 4 times a day before as well. And I know that that's kind of a regular thing for him when there's a band around that warrants that sort of thing. That's totally normal for me.
But I'm sure a lot of people listening here probably are not recording in situations where they can afford to have to pay a guitar tech to come by the studio 4 times a day.
Of course not. That's why they should learn how to do it.
Spend a bunch of time on YouTube, like learning about guitar setups, and just buy yourself a crappy guitar at Walmart or something, or from a flea market, and rip out the frets, replace the frets, or level the frets. Just have a practice guitar that you can beat up and learn how to do this stuff because it's like a super important skill.
I find that lots of people's guitar tone is messed up before it even gets to the amp. I try to tell people this all the time, but I feel like these early steps in the guitar tone process are crucial because if that stuff is messed up, good luck with the rest of it.
Yeah, every step is crucial. Do you guys find that like you have a tough time like when you're mixing records that people recorded at home, that there's a lot of times that stuff gets overlooked, and there's a whole period of like forensic audio that you have to go through just to build up the mix to the point where you're ready to start mixing?
Absolutely. That's why I hammer. I hammer this stuff home because I feel like you're right. Every step is crucial, but I feel like people are more inclined to spend more time on the later steps and just kind of gloss over the early ones because the later steps are sexier, like actually dialing tones.
Or they're just excited to get started, and and then later in the process they have to fix it. Earlier in the process they can just dive in and ignore it.
Yeah, that forensic audio thing on DIs, I sometimes have to spend a long time. Have you ever had to tell a band that hired you to mix that the DI is just not workable?
Yeah. There's only been a couple times where I've had only a DI to work with. Usually, like, they have at least some sort of reference amp tone along with it, so sometimes I'll just go to that. There's been very few times where I've just completely rejected something or told somebody to re-record something, but there have been a few times where I've asked not to be credited.
How does that conversation go?
Well, that's interesting too. And maybe you guys have experienced this too, but I feel like every once in a while somebody hires me to get my name on their record more than that they like what my work sounds like. I remember there was one record that I worked on years ago where the band name was this like kind of scratchy logo down at the bottom of the cover, and then there was a big sticker on the top of the cover that said, mixed by Kurt Ballou. But I think the record was like 13 songs long, and I only mixed 4 out of those 13, and yet, my name was like bigger and more legible than the name of the band on the front cover.
Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So like that kind of stuff is a bit off-putting to me. Like I like to think people are hiring me because they like my work and not just because it's a marketing tool.
Yeah, I find that people sometimes do go to studios for the wrong reasons. Have you ever been hired to get somebody else's sound?
I don't. No, I've never really been asked to mimic anything other than something that I did.
That's pretty cool. I've definitely been hired to mimic other people's sounds, and that's always weird. It's like, why don't you just go to them?
Oh my God, I hate that so much.
Well, I got a buddy who does he does audio for American Idol. And I know other people, I'm sure you guys know people that have done like karaoke stuff where like your job is to mimic other people's sounds. And I think that it's super educational. Like, and I think I'd actually probably really enjoy that, like to try to sit down and, figure out how somebody recorded something and try to make something sound the same. I think that would be really interesting. I mean, it's not flattering, but it's interesting.
It is interesting, but it's very, very hard to get somebody else's signature sound.
You know that FabFilter has EQ match, right?
Just EQ match everything. Your tracks, your master. That's it.
You know what? Can I tell you an EQ match story?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was recording this band, and we did their album in 2 different basic tracking sessions, separated by about 4 or 5 months. And in the end, it was decided that we didn't love the original bass sound, and we liked the new bass sound, and we wanted to reamp the original bass tracks through the new bass rig. I did have a DI for the original bass tracks, but it was a Sans amp with, some of the EQ engaged. So what I had the bass player do was just play along with one of the old songs with a clean DI, and then I used the clean DI just as a temporary guide track to EQ match the Sans amp DI from the original session. And it was like dead nuts.
I've done that as well.
So if it's the exact same or not the exact same performance, but like the same notes and the same rhythm, sort of side by side with the new version, it actually works really well. It's when you have like a song that's like in a different key and totally different tracking tones that it's really weird.
Yeah, then it doesn't work.
Yeah, if it's the same player and the same instrument and all that stuff's the same, then EQ matching is a total godsend.
Yeah. EQ match is actually, just like as an educational tool, kind of interesting. Like, it's not that often that I would use it in a mix, but like to like throw something on and just see like, oh, what would I have to do in order to make my guitar sound like that guitar or whatever, and to see what FabFilter will tell you to do is always kind of an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I feel like actually using if you use too much EQ matching, I feel like your mix will start to get weird. But I feel like if you use it to get information, that's the ideal way, at least for me.
You do have to learn how to hear that stuff. It's pretty important
Absolutely.
if you want to actually be good at this, because part of being good is being quick and being able to get results and commit. And if you just rely on an EQ match, you're never going to learn the ear skills necessary to be a good mixer, for example.
I think it can help you quantify what it is that you're hearing, so that next time like, oh yeah, my guitars always have too much 3.2K or whatever. So it'll help you in the future.
Well, every guitar has too much 3.2K.
How do you feel about 2.7?
No problem. But
Okay.
I've been on a fuck 2K recently. I don't know why. Every 3 months I have like a different frequency area that I'm really sensitive to, that for whatever reason it's irritating me in all my guitar and like cymbal tones. And the last 2 or 3 months, it's been like the 2 to low 3Ks. It's really weird.
Okay.
It just keeps changing.
No, I used to be really diehard 2.7 boosting on massive passive on guitar, and now I've like now I'm like down to 1.8 or sometimes up to like 3.3 or 3.9. It just depends, but yeah, like those are like nice brighteners.
Yeah, I love the massive passive on guitar. I think it's a great EQ.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of gotta learn it. It's not like other EQs where you can just grab it and start tweaking the massive. I think you got to spend some time with it, learning what it does.
Yeah, like any analog piece, it's got a tone and a certain curve, and there's you can't just like pick it up and turn a knob. You have to kind of learn it and try it out on a bunch of different stuff and figure out what it does.
Shelving, like the shelving, like sort of bandwidth controls.
Yeah, totally agree.
Here's a question from Jeremy Dove.
Okay.
Do you have a cab miking do and don't list? So in your head, basically. I doubt you have one written down.
I've done some weird stuff. I remember there's been times where people have come in with cabs with ports and have asked me to like mic inside the port. And
how did that sound?
Like a wind tunnel. But it was interesting. I mean, the guy was playing out of like a solid state crate amp too, so it was distinctive. I guess it depends on if you're going for distinctive or if you're going for like classic. Like I very rarely mic the back of a cab or like the back of an open back cab, but some people love doing it. It all comes down to time. If it's got to be quick, then I'm just going to go right for the usual suspects. Like the 57, the 121, the 421, that kind of stuff, and edge of the dust cone, and into probably like a transformer-based mic preamp, either a Neve clone or a Day King or a Chandler or something, API, something like that. And then if I have a little bit more time to experiment, then I'll start going a little bit deeper into the mic locker, or maybe start recording 2 or 3 amps simultaneously, maybe even some DI. Some affected DIs, like distortion pedals right into the board, that kind of stuff.
Do you sum the multiple mics on the way in, or do you sort that stuff out later?
I do both. Typically, I will sum an amp on the way in. So if I'm recording out of like 3 amps and I have multiple mics per amp, I'll sum the mics on each amp, and then I'll keep each amp on its own track.
That makes sense. So
on bass, I'll tend to keep the mics separate, but on guitar, not usually. Like rim mics, I'll keep separate as well.
And so another question I remember is, how do you decide when you're going to blend an amp? And do you have any, tricks for getting them to work well together? Because I guess blending amps can sometimes be a terrible sounding thing or a great sounding thing.
Yeah, well, one of the tricks in order to get amps to blend together better is, but let's back up a step. Like, why are you blending amps? So what are the reasons to blend amps? In an ideal world, the reason to blend amps is because you're not getting something from one amp that you like in another, and vice versa. So together, they theoretically make a great tone. I think what happens a lot of times, unfortunately, is bands come into my studio and they see a bunch of like cool amps and they're like, dude, I want to use the Orange, but I want to use the Marshall. Oh, and I want to use the Ampeg too. Let's just use them all. So in that case, like sometimes I'll indulge and just not use everything in the mix, or sometimes I'll try to find a way to use everything in the mix. And I'm super guilty of doing this for my own band as well. But yeah, so ideally it's like, oh yeah, I got this amp, but it's a bit lacking in saturation, or it's a bit lacking in depth or something. So like I'll pull out this other amp, and then, together they're awesome. So you get them sounding awesome in the room, and then the trick, then it's really all about the phase relationship between the amps and getting that totally dialed in. And for that, I'll use a mix of, adjusting mic position as well as like all pass filtering with an IBP, like the Little Labs IBP, and then finally just micro sample-based delays to really get things lined up properly. But one of the ways that you can make the phase relationship stuff less important is if, let's say you have 2 amps and like one's the bright amp, one's the dark amp. Rather than like putting a dark mic on the bright amp and a bright mic on the dark amp to bring them closer together, you choose a bright mic for the bright amp and a dark mic for the dark amp to actually even to make the differences between the two amps even greater, and then you'll have less of a phase relationship between them, and it's almost like you're in like a biamp type territory where this is kind of like a crossover between, you know, the bright amp and the dark amp, and you're able to kind of balance them independently of each other without there being a super destructive phase relationship.
So basically, the closer the tones are together, the more the phase relationship is a major factor.
Correct.
Makes sense. So actually, Finn from Creative Live was asking.
Finn McKenty.
So yeah,
Hi,
hello, Finn. So he wants to know more about tracking. So you need to do minimal editing. I'll just read his question. Tracking, so you need to do minimal editing, which is maybe just how to play guitar in quotation marks, but the idea of how to get sick tones without recording one note at a time. I guess you would be the person to ask about this.
Well, I guess hopefully you have a sick guitar player.
Right?
Where do we find one of those?
Well, you know, I think it's not going to directly answer his question, but one of the ways that you can make people think that you're better at recording is to record really good players, because really good players just tend to sound good, and really bad players tend to sound bad even out of the same gear. So if you can try to avoid recording bands that suck, people will think you're really good. So that's one technique. You just have to be willing to not work a lot.
Let me just chime in. I think there's a misconception about Ross Robinson. I don't want to say anything bad about him, because I mean, the guy's a freaking genius, and look what he's done to music, you know. But I know some people who have worked with him and said, like, yeah, he's a complete idiot. He has no clue what's going on in terms of engineering. He's just such a creative mind and so fired up about like music and the meaning behind it and like getting performances to where they need to be, that it doesn't matter that he doesn't understand engineering. Like, he's getting it right before it even enters the air. You know what I'm saying?
Wait, who is this? Sorry, I missed who you were talking about.
Ross Robinson.
Ross Robinson. Oh,
yeah, okay.
So like he gets it right before it even gets into the air, and so as a result of that, it ends up sounding great, even if he has no clue what's going on engineering wise. And that's not to say that he's a complete engineering idiot. I'm sure he understands the basics, but I know some people that worked with him and said that they actually understood more about the recording process than he did, but it didn't matter because he just gets good results, with his mind.
That totally makes sense. But I mean, in terms of like what can you do, just given your situation where you're not like choosing the player, I think it's just a matter of making the players comfortable, making sure they're well rehearsed, and also making sure they've got a comfortable chair and that their instrument feels good to play, and that they like the sound that they're monitoring, and that they're excited to play, and that they can hear everything well, and the song was tracked at the right tempo, and all that kind of stuff that just lets people play their best. And if they need, like, do they have, did they get to go to the juice bar that morning, and do they have the right amount of coffee, and have they pooped yet, and all the different like little psychological factors, just making sure someone's ready to perform. You don't want to, like, especially singers, but guitar players too, you don't want to just like throw them to the wolves. You want to make sure that they're ready to do their job, and so that you get the best performance out of them. Sometimes there are people who are the driving creative force of a band, but they're also the worst player in the band.
That's me.
And that's always interesting, yeah. Because then you have to like there's a band I've worked with a few times that I won't name, where the band leader and primary songwriter is arguably the worst guitar player in the band. And he knows it, though. So he doesn't have an ego about it. So he like delegates the recording to the other players, and then he'll if it's something that he really has a certain feel for, he'll play it. But I actually even played a lot of guitar on their records because I was able to like play it with the precision that he wanted. And I think letting, as a guitar player, or as any musician, if you can let go of your ego, if the end product is the most important thing in your recording process, and you can let go of your ego and let somebody else play it, or let EYAL's assistant program it, or whatever it happens to be, then that'll make for the best end product. And if that's not what's the most important to you, if what is most important to you that you play on your own record and that you make something that you are proud of, then just make sure you show up prepared.
Yeah, I feel like 80% of these types of problems would be solved by people showing up prepared. Because honestly, the last thing I want to do is start playing guitar on their record and have to learn their riffs and then reprogram the drums and do all that stuff. I would rather that they just come in prepared and we can do it for real. But
a lot of people don't know they're not prepared. That's the problem.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
That's what's so awesome about home recording now that so many bands have the capability of doing a bit of recording on their own. They can start to become aware of what their own shortcomings as players are. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all been in a situation where you want to record a drummer on a click, but they've never played to a click before, and everything just kind of falls apart. But if they had done some of their own recordings and practiced, not just practice how to play the songs, but practice how to record the songs, then everything will turn out better.
Absolutely. Well, there is a skill as well to knowing how to be recorded as a musician.
Yeah.
And I think that it's totally separate from knowing how to perform or knowing how to play.
Yeah, when you see a band live, there's a visual excitement that will lead your ear to hear certain things that you can just never reproduce on a record. When you see the drummer, their arms are flying all over the place and it looks awesome and it's super exciting live. But in a recorded sense, if the snare drum is being played 8 times as loud in the slow part as it is during the blast beat, it's just it's a nightmare for the engineer.
Hey, that stick twirl, though, that adds tone to the air of the room. Excites the air,
There's a band I know that insisted on miking up a middle finger and just putting that on the track.
Oh, I love that.
What mic did you use and what pre? That's the real question.
I didn't record them.
Did you compress it? I mean, got to put a distressor on that middle finger.
L1 for sure. L1 on the middle finger.
So here's a question that I actually made somebody rephrase because I thought I understood the question, but I realized I didn't. And it turned out to be a pretty good question. So I'm going to read you the rephrased version. Let's see if it makes any sense. So It's from Jake Yablonowski. I hope I pronounced that right. There are a lot of things that have to happen to make a guitar tone fit in the mix. Out of all the things that need to be done, like EQ or multiband or compression, just to name some possibilities, some things are easier to learn than others, and some techniques are more important. My question is, what technique or process took you guys the most time to get good at? For example, maybe it took Joel years of experience and practice to realize that doing X improved his mixing abilities, X being whatever he answers. I hope that clarifies. So does that question make sense?
Yeah, but it's a tough one to answer. I don't know if I have an answer. I think it's I just kind of take a holistic approach to all this stuff where I feel like I'm just always learning about everything. Lately for me, I think I've been making great strides with learning about pedals and been expanding my pedal collection and understanding how a pedal is not just a sound in and of itself, but a pedal is sort of a way to optimize the interface between a guitar and an amp. Prior to that, I think I was learning a lot about guitar pickups. I bought a guitar that had an EMG in it when I was 17, and I basically played nothing but EMG 85s for 20 years, and then I started saying hey, maybe there's some other pickups out there. Maybe I should learn about them. And I build guitars too. So and some of them for customers, some of them for myself. So especially as I've been building guitars, people ask me for different pickups. So it's been a great opportunity for me to learn oh, okay, here's what the different bare knuckle models sound like, and here's what a JB sounds like, and here's a PAF, and here's a TV Jones, and kind of learning not just how do these pickups differ between each other within the same rig, but how will this pickup cause you to set your amp differently, or how will this pickup cause you to reach for a certain fuzz pedal as opposed to a distortion pedal or an overdrive, and that kind of stuff, and just realizing how sort of interdependent every choice is all along the way with the whole guitar single chain. And I think it is very much incremental learning. You learn a little bit about setting up an amp, and then that changes what you've learned about miking. So then you kind of have to learn a little bit more about miking, and then now that you've changed this, now your mix EQ needs are a little bit different. So you learn a little more about that, and then now you start mixing records that you didn't record, and now you got to learn how to handle all these different types of recorded guitars that are coming into your mix environment. And so it's just a lot of incremental learning. I wish I could give an easy answer, but I don't really have one.
Yeah, but that's an honest answer.
Yeah, but people don't I never wanted that. When I was first starting recording, I wanted I wanted to ask a question, and then people tell me oh yeah,
just do this.
That's this. I mean, there are things like that. If you want a Swedish death metal sound, you get a Boss HM2. It's not totally that simple, but that's you need to do that one step. There's some things that are just that cut and dry, but most things are not, unfortunately.
I feel and I know what you mean, that people do want the silver bullet answer, but the people who have helped me the most musically over the years have given me basically the answer that you just gave, which is, you have to be really interested in it and never stop learning, and just go for it. And every time you got to take on something new, go for it, just like you went for the previous thing you had to learn. And that's really the answer, is be willing to take a few years of your life or more to really figure this stuff out, and take an active, proactive interest in learning as much as possible about it.
Hey, Joel and Joey, do you guys want to chime in on this?
Well, I was just going to say, when you're in this profession and when you mess around with recording stuff, you are always a student, and I feel like there's new things to be learned every day, even when you know how everything works. Somebody comes in with a goofy ass riff or something, and you're like, wow, that's interesting, and I need to learn how to make that sound good.
Yeah. Every time there's something happening in my studio that I don't love, maybe I don't love the band, or I'm not getting along with the people, or or the tones suck or whatever, I always just try to think of that as an opportunity to learn. How can I make this better? Or how can I relinquish control to these people and see how they think about things, and what can I learn from them, or whatever. Just I try to treat everything as a learning opportunity.
I'll take on to that last question that the listener had asked about, what do you think is the most important thing that helped in guitar mixing? And from my own perspective, I think it was really learning how to EQ and hear different frequencies for what they are and how they interact. And that sounds like a really simple statement, but what I'm describing is a process that takes years, where you sit there and all of a sudden you're really sensitive to a certain part of the mid-range, and you start hearing it in everything, and then you can see it with razor focus in your mind and manipulate it. And then all of a sudden that opens up another one, and then another one. So really learning how to EQ definitely helped me take my guitar game up a lot, because there are certain ranges and frequencies and things that I learned to listen for that I know automatically are usually going to get discarded in most situations, and other ones where, situations you have to learn how to balance certain things against each other and apply different strategies. So that was a big one for me.
It might sound weird, but it's you need to get better at listening to music, which I know it sounds
essentially the same point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's understanding what 400 hertz actually sounds like.
And how much of it you do or don't need and why.
Yeah. And getting that connection with your gear or your plugins or your tools or your interface or whatever you're using, so that you know, like, okay, I'm hearing this one thing and it's got too much bass. How do I react to that to change it so that it has the right amount of bass that I want to hear? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Joel, when you have a frequency that's bugging you, do you find that you hear that in all listening environments, other rooms, other speakers? Do you hear that in other people's recordings as well? Or is it just like in your own production environment that it's bugging you?
Usually it's per instrument. For example, I'll equate it to this. This is the best way. Like when I listen to a sound, maybe it's because I played in a band for 15 years, but I always wore earplugs, so hopefully my ears aren't too damaged. But like when I'm sitting there and I listen to a sound, the first thing that goes into my head, it either sounds fucking awesome or something's wrong with it and I have to get to the bottom of why it doesn't sound right, or something's like harsh or irritating. And then I try to get rid of the irritation and reveal the beauty of the tone. Like it sounds too tubby or like too boxy, for example. So I usually go in and try to find something where like something sounds wrong with the sound if I'm not immediately like, wow, that sounds great to me. And I try to do it. So it's not like I go out and hear, for example, 4K and everything. And now I know we joke a lot and we talk a lot about that. But generally, I would say those are more a summation of tendencies that have been built up over years of mixing. Like if there's a couple of frequencies that I hear over and over and over in the guitars that I get to mix that drive me nuts, it's usually in that range. Like I said, sometimes that changes. But I try to take everything on a case-by-case basis and just listen to the sound, listen to the song, figure out the big picture, then micro it down to a small finite level and get in there and notch out whatever needs to be notched out to make it clearer and more pristine and like just better sounding.
Okay, so you really do believe it's within the track and not just like within your listening environment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very comfortable with my listening environment. Like I never go into my car and then hear 4K in a certain way versus like on my speakers or versus like on my assistant speakers. It's really just like when we talk about a lot on the podcast, like I said, it's tendencies and it's like an 80-20 thing. Most of the time, it's usually within X for me and the way I hear, but it's always on a case-by-case basis. I'll give you an example. I mixed a couple of different songs for a couple of different bands this morning. And, one particular song had a really nasty build-up in the 2 range that was just pissing me off, and I got it off. Then I go to a different band and a different guitar, and it's a similar tone. I was using like the same amp sim plugin, but it was a completely different thing that was irritating me. So you got to take it one thing at a time. Listen to the sound and figure out what you want to do with it and why.
I think it's important to not pass judgment on the tone and gear choices before you've heard what's actually coming through the speakers.
And in context of the song.
Exactly.
Because I know that you guys are probably a bit young for this, but there was this like, I started playing guitar like right at the end of like the pink Charvel rack mount gear craze, and I guess that's kind of back. But I was playing guitar like before grunge hit, and back then everybody had a BBE Sonic Maximizer in their rack. Because like
they sold it well.
It just couldn't their amp couldn't put out enough high end sizzle or enough bottom end rumble. It's like they wanted to sound like a full band all by themselves, just playing their guitar. And then when those guitar players joined bands, there was like no space left for the cymbals and no space left for the bass guitar. And
guitar is the only instrument that matters.
Obviously, as a guitar player, that's what I think. But unfortunately, vocals are the only thing that matters. Ask like your mom or something. She probably couldn't even tell you what instruments are on her favorite song. It's like everything is in support of the vocal. Unfortunately, as a guitar player, I have to admit that. But anyway,
blasphemy. But anyways, go ahead.
But one of the most important things in like my early studio recording experiences was like walking in and seeing these studios with like big collections of combo amps and smaller amps. And, I remember talking to an engineer friend of mine saying like, yeah, like sometimes just to sound huge, you need something that's really small because like that's the only thing that's going to cut through this dense mix. Like you've got like a lead guitar thing with a ton of character or something like that. You don't want to record it out of like a 5150 and a 6x12. You want to record it out of like a Fender Champ with a fuzz pedal in front of it, because that's the only thing that's going to like cut through the wall of guitars that you've already established.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Kurt, just want to thank you so much for coming on here with us and taking the time to talk shop and then answer all those questions.
Yeah, no sweat. I think what you guys are doing is awesome, and I've already learned a lot from listening to your other podcasts. So
that's pretty cool.
I hope that this helps other people as well.
Absolutely. Well, you've been extremely requested, and our listening base loves your work. So
Sweet.
it's really cool to have you come on and just pick your brain a little bit.
Well, take it easy, and thanks again, dude.
Anytime.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast is brought to you by Creative Live, the world's best online classroom for creative professionals with classes on songwriting, engineering, mixing, and mastering. Go to creativelive.com/audio to start learning now. The Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast is also brought to you by Ernie Ball, the world's premium manufacturer of guitar strings, bass strings, and guitar accessories. Go to www.ernieball.com to learn more. To ask us questions, suggest topics, and interact, visit urmacademy.com and subscribe today.